go. Can you hear me now?
Hello.
Hello, Ray. Okay, very cool. So it's a new day, it's a new week. The country is on fire, but it was a beautiful weekend. It's Pride Month. It's
Hell yeah.
something I forget it, Corpus Christi for people who celebrate that later this month. It's also a crazy pandemic that is now number 3 on the list of fatalities by war in the United States. It's all very exciting. So, how was your weekend?
It was great. It was a good time.
Amazing.
Okay.
Not being
good.
sarcastic. She sounded really sarcastic, but she's not.
No, it was very good.
All right. So tell me more. I think at least a few folks were thinking about getting out on a trip somewhere. Is that true?
We did that.
Yep, we went to we floated the Current River,
Excellent.
or at least 25 miles of it.
Yeah.
Okay. How crowded was it?
The first day actually was pretty crowded, with a lot of people in tubes and kayaks and canoes. And then we reached a point where there was basically no one for like 6 or 7 miles. And then we reached another point where everybody was in motorboats.
And then we were the only ones in a canoe.
Only ones
so
in
that
canoes,
was
and it was
super
pretty
fun.
stressful.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I heard at least a half dozen different topics. So, all right, we'll get to it for sure. I'm glad you guys are back safely.
Thank you.
Us too. We did, came back and everything was on fire, and we're like, oh, well, whoopsies, we missed some stuff.
Yeah, can you imagine waking up from a coma from like late last year till now?
Oh my gosh.
Oh God, that would be a really funny conversation. I've seen that'd be great.
Well, hopefully all of this is a really good excuse for people to have a lot of good and pretty overdue conversations about a lot of this stuff, for sure. Been talking with a couple of police officer friends of mine, and they're super not excited about going to work right now.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty hard on everybody. And I think we can say that without excusing the horrible, horrible things that have been done in the name of enforcing whatever they were enforcing on that poor guy. Okay, Ray and Taryn, were you guys on a trip as well? Or in town?
We went to Jackson Falls on Saturday.
A+.
And it
Favorite spot.
was the most packed that I've ever seen it before.
Okay. Was everybody social distancing on the rock walls?
No, I'd say there was a general lack of social distancing.
Nobody was wearing a mask, and there were tents like all along the first quarter mile of trail.
Oh, yeah, at least. So there's there's the parking lot there, and then there's the little trail until you get to the first waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
There's tents all along there, and then traveling from the first waterfall to the second waterfall where you would climb down into like the climbing route areas and all that. That was loaded with tents the whole way too. People
Wow.
popped up on top of each other.
Wow, okay. Any masks, or were people just kind of doing their thing?
No masks.
No masks. The porta potty was closed too, so I can't imagine where people, hopefully some people had good L&P training for taking care of the business.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really interesting porta potty to a park nerd like me. But is that the one I believe it's poured concrete, but it looks like it's got a wood grain on it?
Sure enough.
Have you ever thought about that? I mean, the implications are just not great. So yeah, that's something. Hey, Leah, welcome back. We're talking about a couple of trips that happen and all sorts of different topics that this is raising. So anyway, glad you guys got to head over to Jackson Falls. We've done a bunch of research over there. It's just a great place to go for sure. So excellent. And Candy, I think you were going somewhere as well, right?
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
gonna go to Jackson Falls, and ended up just camping along Lake Murfreesboro.
Okay.
So that was
Right on.
cool. It was pretty packed, and like no one was really wearing masks.
Okay.
We had there were a few like drunk campers that were like down the way from us that kind of stumbled into our camp. So
That's super awkward.
yeah, we're thinking about maybe quarantine for a bit. We didn't know where they were from or who they were, but
Okay. Well, onset of symptoms in 2 to 12 days. Good luck.
it's been like 3 days. So
Okay. And Leah, you were out on a trip. Is that so?
Yeah. Me and my friends Molly and Ryan did a bike packing trip from Grand Tower to Golconda.
Along the river to river?
Partially, we did a bit on the river to river relay, and then we did do it a little bit on the trail, but like biking on the trail is pretty difficult, so we just did a little bit of that.
Okay. Right on. Very, very cool. This was the weekend to make it happen, man. It'd been kind of gross a little bit before, and now just like everybody go now, right now, go. So that's great. So let's talk a little bit about some of these things that you guys and gals observed out there. And if we're talking about one particular place and your trip also kind of featured that thing, let's chime in about it there. So let's take a look at Ozark Scenic Riverways. Let's see if I can share my screen without blowing up the internet here. All right, share screen, share. This desktop. Share. Okay. Can you see me now?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
All right.
Cool.
So the idea with Ozark Scenic Riverways is it's in this sort of karst geology of southeast Missouri, meaning it's limestone and other calcareous minerals. And the bedrock is just Swiss cheese with all kinds of stuff. So fractured flow like you would not believe. Rivers flowing under each other, underground, and popping up above ground 70 miles away. You can see there's a bunches of cleared farmland and so forth. And Ozark Scenic Riverways is this 160 plus mile long little ribbon of a river. And it's headquartered, at least the administration of it's headquartered at Van Buren here. So Van Buren's on the southern section or downstream section of the lower current river. And this part of the river is super duper popular for like the tubing that you guys encountered is huge in this section of the river because you can get on upstream, kind of up here above watercress, and just kind of float on down and get fallen down drunk, and then just have a buddy pull you out on these huge gravel beaches and sandbars in Van Buren. This is, in some cases, thousands of people a day. So one of the basic ideas of park management is that we have kind of 4 kinds of carrying capacity. Physical, how many people can you physically fit on the site? Social carrying capacity, when does crowding start to become a problem regardless of how many people you can physically fit on? Ecological carrying capacity, which is like, what about all of the other species that don't have the privilege of being human? How are they doing? And then there's managerial carrying capacity that kind of is an overlay on top of the other 3. Like, what options does, in this case, the National Park Service have to manage this particular landscape? So the physical carrying capacity here at the downstream reaches of the current river exceeded in some cases. I mean, these are not quite like Disneyland size parking lots, but it's a lot. And these are very, very large hotels. And the camping is just wrapped all across this landscape all around that spot. So sounds like you guys were on the upper current river. Is that correct?
Yeah. We went from Poltite to Two Rivers.
Oh, that's a pretty section. All right, so let's take a look at Poltite. And do you know why Poltite is named Poltite?
No.
So that is a forestry Sure. The farmers and foresters who lived in the area around Poltite, because of the karst geology and because of this relatively soft, limey kind of landscape eroding very quickly, the access down to Poltite is down this steep, winding gravel road. And so think back to before we had internal combustion engines, and it was, folks in the mid to late 1800s getting down into and up out of the Poltite River ford. The animals, pack animals, oxen, horses, stuff like that, would pull tight against their harnesses and try to get logs and farm produce up and out so that they could get to an actual highway, which weren't paved back then, but a lot easier than going up a steep slope. But pack animals cannot tolerate a side slope. They have to be on a flat left to right surface. It can be fairly steep up down, which is why you get these roads running straight up the slope. So there's a little bit of geography trivia for you and a sense of the physiographic layout of the spot. All right, so Poltite is pretty awesome. And this section is much beloved. So let's talk a little bit about kind of that sense of crowding. You said at the start of it, there were a whole bunch of other floaters, tubers, canoeists, stuff like that. Did you guys ever have a sense that this is too many people?
Maybe at the very, very beginning, because we got there and we drove that morning, we got there a little bit later. And so when we were launching, there was probably like another 15 or so groups like down on the banks getting ready to launch as well.
Okay.
So we all launched at about the same time.
We played leapfrog a lot with a lot of people, which became like very like interesting to see the exact same people over and over and over again. And then you see 30 other groups of people in separate like canoeing or just stuff. And you're like, oh, wow, all right, there's a lot of people. And then you'll stop. And we stopped a couple times for like lunch and to let the dog go to the bathroom. And then there's more and more people just constantly. It was kind of crazy, but it wasn't bad, I would say. Like the second day with the actual motorists was a lot harder because like the other canoeists didn't disturb us canoeing, whereas the motorboats created so much. And we were talking about it the whole time, how like quickly that these boats were speeding by and creating so much erosion, and let alone just like us flopping around on the water. So it was
I'd say that the second day, even though there were probably less people we came across, they were a lot more destructive than for the first day.
Yeah.
That's a fair observation. Wake energy causes a lot of erosion. So when Schoonover talks in Force Hydro about bank and shore stabilization using riprap, dump trucking in literally hundreds or thousands of tons of busted up rock to just armor up a shoreline, it's for wake energy in a lot of cases where there's recreational boating going on. So that's a thing. That's a thing for sure. And we can get cases of fishermen actively destroying the habitat that they're coming to fish by getting so excited about being there that they're, throwing up big rooster tails awake and stuff like that. So it's fairly consistent with the research and the impressions across a lot of national parks. How you guys talked about how the crowding level is partially about the number of people, but as much or more about the perceived alikeness of the people to you and their ecological footprint. So when I'm on the current river in the motorized sections, and the river's built up into about 30 reaches, which are about 10 reaches per district, and there are 3 districts: Upper Current, Jack's Fork, and Lower Current. And each of those reaches is designated for go or no go on motorboats at all. And then if they are motorboat friendly, then what's the horsepower limit there? And do you have to have a jet or a prop to be able to do it? And when I'm kayaking on there, I'm fairly low to the water, not real stable left, right. I'm very stable front, back. So pitch stable, not roll stable. And whenever I hear a motorboat coming around, I may not even see them yet, but their acoustic footprint now includes me, and I'm craning my neck to figure out where they're coming from, because sometimes, you know, the sound echoes off of those bluff walls.
It's so loud.
Yeah,
It's
we were
crazy.
talking about that a lot too, because I mean we would just like count, because there'd be a big old curve, and we could hear it for like 15 seconds before we could even see them, at least.
Yeah. So that's kind of just a basic underlying physical reality of these situations. And kind of adjacent to crowding as a social impact of recreation on a forest landscape is conflict. And conflict is almost always asymmetric. So, you know, the motorboat folks might be even happy to see you there, or, you know, generally pretty indifferent, but you may not be real happy to see them. So when there's an encounter, you know, if they're buzzing right by you, the Maverick Tower flyby kind of deal, they're maybe rocking you real hard in a canoe, and they just sort of chuckle and move right on.
Exactly. Yeah. They know, like, we saw, I'd say, at least 15 in the 3 hours that we were from, like, our camp, the place where we camped the night, which we learned was kind of irregular, because, like, we think that we didn't see really anybody else who was sleeping on the bank. Like, we picked a spot on the bank and slept there, and we didn't see anybody else doing that. And this, like, so, like, the 3 hours of yesterday, so, like, of the 4 or 5 hours we were out there, it was like 3 of them that we saw about 15 to 20 motorboats, and of that 15 to 20, 2 stopped for us to let us move along before zooming on their way.
Yeah, everyone else
Just
like
zoomed by.
A couple of them slowed down a little bit, but not enough that there wasn't a wake.
Yeah.
So, and they were all waving to us, and I'm like glaring at them.
After like the 10th person just zooming by, I was just glaring at them as they zoomed by at top speed. I'm like, are you serious? Like, you can't just be a little bit considerate of the fact that, like, all of our camping gear is in here, and if you flip us, we're gonna lose like hundreds of dollars worth of gear right now. So
that has happened to me on this river. On a field
that
trip,
happened
actually.
to somebody else we saw, and we felt pretty bad because they lost their, like, obviously they were not prepared for the river because they lost their
they didn't have
phone,
a dry box or anything.
Yeah, they lost their phone, wallet, keys, and we were like, ooh, that sucks. But
that is rough. So there's a lot we can do to help kind of mitigate this beforehand. And Ozark Scenic Riverways is actually sort of one of the big national stages on which the Park Service has hammered out this process. And a big piece of this is understanding that people's moment-to-moment experience has essentially nothing to do with the total number of people in the park, right? So we could spend a bunch of effort, you know, across almost 200 miles of river and count like everybody who's there at one time, called PAOT, people at one time. And maybe even break it up if you want to get real froggy with each district and each reach. And it's fairly easy to do at each landing, very hard to do along each section of river. So there's a lot of computer modeling that happens with that. But that was kind of the first effort that park rangers made back in the 60s and 70s, when baby boomers were coming up out of World War II and just like spiking use over time. And after a while, they realized it doesn't matter how many people are in the park. It matters how many people you are aware of at that spot at that time. So we use a different indicator variable called PPV, people per view shed, or people per soundscape, PPS. Where, you know, with the current river, look how sinuous this river is, indicative of fairly aggressive landscape re-architecting, right? I mean, like, these are some pretty sharp bends in fairly short distances.
we had a bit of a challenge with spinning. We spun a lot, but
all right, who was steering him back? Doesn't matter.
Both. We switched, so it was both of our faults.
Oh,
but
okay.
I would like to say that I was the worst of the two of us.
Okay. So
We tried our best.
Where you have a lot of degrees of curvature in the river, like here, the river curves 180 degrees from Pull Tight Campground to about the center of the screen, just up Harrison Hollow. And then it curves almost 180 degrees between this elbow and Harrison Hollow, and then it curves 180 degrees between Harrison Hollow and Footlog Hollow, and then almost 180 degrees towards Big Solution Hole. So these are each kind of breaking up the view shed or the visible landscape when you're on the water and down low into very, very small sub ecosystems, if you want to think of it like that. They're not actually sub ecosystems, but they're view sheds. So for those of you who've taken GIS, line of sight analysis for each spot along the river kind of continuously is one way that we can figure out how much space, how much view shed do we have to get away with, so to speak. So in the Park Service's case, their answer for trying to deal with this on this section of river was for everybody who arrives with a canoe concessioner, which is a private company. And in this case, it's a lot of families who've been in this area a long time, and they switch from farming over to renting out canoes and tubes and driving school buses modified for pulling all this stuff. They made it contingent on getting a permit to do this. Like, these people's entire livelihood is now based around renting out these canoes and stuff, and then they live on that the rest of the year. They have to space it out. So they have to coordinate with each other, and the different companies are sort of assigned different landings that they're allowed to even go to. And so the summer of 2010, I spent 3 months with 3 undergrads and a grad student, among other things like mapping informal trails, literally sitting at each of these landings and just counting how many people go by, how many people go in, how many people come out. It's kind of data called turning movement. So how do you turn through the system in and out of it in a closed system like a river basin? And you can get really, really detailed and precise understanding of who is where and when, and figure out, okay, so how many people, you know, if Keone's planning a trip, is he going to see Delaney? You can understand that very, very precisely after running some of these analyses. This is a bunch of like GIS analyses and field work and just like mapping and math and stuff like that. But this is part of forestry, right? In the same way that you use statistics to cruise a timber stand and get a better sense of what's there, but not have to actually measure every single tree. So same kind of approach, but we're measuring people, and they got a lot better. So when the Park Service first got into this in the 70s into the early 80s, and they were like, yeah, we need to regulate this because people are dying of heart attacks on the water, and the rangers can't get to them because they can't get their boat through clots of hundreds of tubers all lashed together and passing beers back and forth and stuff like that, like stretching from bank to bank all the way down the river. We got to fix this. Like, people are dying. So they got into this whole permitting thing, and the companies rafting are providing rafting tubes and stuff like that were furious. They were like, you can't shut our business down. This is a public waterway. And the Park Service is like, yes, but also no. And collected a bunch of data. SIU foresters helped them with that back in the day. And then who's getting a bunch of notifications? Is your phone like set on your computer? What is that? Anyway. So yeah, then the Park Service kind of put in this metered thing, and the concessioners realized, wait a minute, so they're actually protecting this space so that we can use it at maximum efficiency. So the Park Service spent millions of dollars over the years to do this stuff. And then that ended up actually being more business, but better spread out over time for the canoe concessioners. So it's bad in patches and spots now. But back in the day, it was ridiculous. You could walk from one side of the river to the other across like people's heads in tubes and not get your feet wet. for large chunks of the summer. So that was not necessarily real family friendly with a lot of drunk people. So Park Service stepped in, and sometimes managing the ecosystem means managing the huge press of people, and then the more biological and physical pieces of the ecosystem can kind of run themselves once this part's taken care of. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So that's something that's kind of arising out of your trip. Did you guys ever feel unsafe? And this is a question for everybody across all of the trips.
At night a little bit, but that's just because like I wasn't sure like how close we were to civilization. We couldn't hear a whole lot of stuff, but like occasionally I heard what was like actually like a bullfrog, but I thought that it was like it was one of the like the alarms of like a weather warning, and that's what I was like, where the heck is that coming from? And
Okay,
then there was a tree in the water that sounded like scraping, like our canoe was scraping and like going in the river. And so I like woke up and freaked out thinking our canoe was floating away. But no, didn't feel unsafe.
That's good. That's good. So in a natural soundscape in a park, when people hear anthropogenic noises or anthrophony, like a symphony is a bunch of instruments playing together, that's the syn part, and phony or phonia is the audio part. When we hear human-based noises, they can have an effect like instant crowding and conflict if we hear that sound and attribute it to something negative, like a helicopter in the very quiet soundscape at Haleakala Crater, hugely disruptive. People hate it 100%. But that same helicopter, if it gets a little bit closer and they see a big red and white plus symbol on it, like this is an emergency extraction helicopter, everybody's like, oh, I feel better. I'm glad that person's getting some help. So it's not about the physical characteristics of the sound, like its frequency, its, the pitch, its amplitude, its volume level, the A-weighted decibel sound signature, the human audible frequency fingerprint of that sound. It has everything to do with what we think that sound means for us, like that bullfrog sound. So as you're a forester, think about your footprint on the soundscape. At Denali National Park, they have to do road work. They have sunlight like 20, 22 hours a day in the summer up there because it's real high latitude. And they got to have crews working basically double shifts to kind of regrade that road and then have 6-foot frost heaves like shove dirt straight up 6 feet or like sideways off of a road cut, and then go regrade that the next day and then the next day and so forth, just to keep the road open for those 3 months until it snows back over in August. And then they use a bunch of, sled dogs and stuff like that and snow machines along the road. But it's just noisy. And with the beautiful sort of glacially sculpted bowl-shaped valleys of that Denali Park Road area, the sound just carries and carries and carries. So they have to be very careful about the kind of equipment they use, the specific road operations they're doing, and so forth. Another place where this is a huge issue is at, let's share Google Earth again. And let's see if we get this going again. Here we go. Let's take a look at Yosemite Valley. So this is a place where the physical shape of the cliffs, if you're into rock climbing, for those of you who went to Jackson Falls, you may have heard of El Capitan, Half Dome, Quarter Dome, places like that. El Capitan, it's not just a Mac operating system anymore. So with those vertical walls, you can imagine that noise and even people shouting from hundreds of yards away can echo and actually even become painfully and dangerously distracting for climbers up on the wall. So doing road work in Yosemite Valley is about so much more than like, what temperature does the tar and chip mix need to be? Or when do we start mixing the concrete the morning before? It has stuff to do like, how far away is my jackhammer going to echo and cause Alex Honnold to go like cartwheeling down a cliff face a couple thousand feet? That's a pretty sick reference. For those of you who are not climbers, super sick. All right, so this feature here is called, it was called El Capitan. Let me get back to it. There we go. We completely lost it. All right, there it is. How did we get way over in like Nevada? All right, here we go. So El Capitan is this gorgeous, world famous rock formation, and not far away is this camp. It's world famous among rock climbers called Camp 4. And it's like where all the rope running rats and granite under their fingernails, like dirtbag climbers, go flop down and then try to ascend some pretty world-class spots. But El Capitan Meadow directly faces El Cap. It's this little D-shaped meadow down here. And you can imagine in the summer when you might see a bunch of climbers up there, especially early in the morning or late in the evening, when you get that moment, that alpenglow moment that photographers call power hour, when the sun angle is real low. You get that bright sort of orange and red and salmon. It's not pink, it's salmon. Sort of color just lighting up the rock. And then you can see the rock climbers' headlamps, kind of highlighting where they are from a great distance away. It's a wonderful, wonderful spot. But you can also see, even from the air, how visitor use over time has created literally hundreds of trail segments in this tiny little spot. It's not much bigger than a football field or a soccer pitch. But this is a very, very intensely used place. A lot of people per square meter, if you want to think of it that way. And the noise signature that they carry with them echoes and just reverberates and can be a real pain in the butt for climbers who are baking under the sun on these huge rock faces and sort of clamped up against these gigantic thermal masses in the summer. So soundscapes matter, and they matter for that quick wake up in the middle of the night moment of, is that a bullfrog or an emergency weather warning? What do I need to know? You can imagine how frustrating it is or stressful it is for backpackers to be in a tornado alley type area, and tornadoes sound like what anthrophonic source of sound? Anybody know what tornadoes kind of sound like if you're up close?
Like a train?
A freight train, exactly. Yeah. Just that sort of rushing sound. And, if, for example, if you're on like the Godwin section of the River to River Trail and up by Inspiration Point, you are in and out of the reach of the trains serving the petroleum industry at, was it Ole? I forget what town it is over there. I forget. But anyway, there are spots where like 50 feet forward and back on the trail, you can either hear trains clear as a bell or not at all because you're behind sheltering cliffs in the acoustic shadow, just like we get rain shadows on the dry side of mountains. So soundscapes matter a lot, and a lot more than we used to think they do for foresters. Looking down Yosemite Valley, you can see that sort of characteristic U shape in the cross section or the slice profile. Acoustically, that funnels the sound right up these cliffs. And even 50 feet back from the cliff edge, it's extremely hard to hear anything in the valley. So we have sharp effects based on where you put stuff like, well, you can see one right here. Trails. It's kind of terrifying that Google has imagery on all of us in this much detail. My God. Individual rocks and bushes. Where's my tinfoil hat? Right. So long digression about soundscapes, but this is something that you guys are encountering on your trip. Okay, cool. What was it like when the drunken guys were crashing into your campsite, Keone?
I don't know. Like it was. I feel like if it was like a normal time, like it wouldn't have been a big deal at all. Like they were nice enough and everything. I think it was just kind of stressful because it was like the first time we'd really been like out doing stuff with like the potential of kind of running into a bit of a crowd.
Okay.
But it wasn't, I don't think I felt, it wasn't that I felt unsafe necessarily. It was just knowing like the implications of being in a crowd at this time was a scary part.
Yeah, for sure. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very alike, 0 being, well, 1 being not at all alike, what was the perceived alikeness between your group members and these folks drunkenly crashing into your campsite?
What do you mean by a likeness? Like how similar they were?
Like same age, same socioeconomic status, same race, same intention for being at the park in the first place, same language spoken, same clothing worn.
Yeah, they seemed like they were like relatively outdoorsy people. It seemed like everyone who was there was kind of just there to like camp.
Okay.
There were some people that were fishing a little bit. But yeah, they were, I think they were all white. Like same age and everything. Maybe a couple of years older than we were, but not by much. They were like, yeah, they were pretty similar to us, I'd say.
Okay, right on. So one aspect of, or one modifying factor of conflict is perceived alikeness. To the extent that somebody looks, acts, sounds, dresses like you and your group, you are much more likely to not count them towards a crowding total, if that makes sense. And a lot less likely to perceive conflict with them. Because as human beings, we tend to make very quick evaluations of who somebody is based on kind of how they're presenting. And that means a lot. A lot of that is kind of unconscious. And this is something that park rangers and foresters have only really started to scratch the surface on in terms of coming to grips with. So you can imagine how kind of like environmental justice is button up into this issue. So for example, I was a master's student at the University of Vermont with an African-American gal also completing her master's degree. And, you know, at one point she explained that her family didn't have any, like zero parks and rec background at all, nothing forestry related, anything like that, because she said, quite frankly, at one point that, you know, the woods are where my ancestors would get lynched. Like, why would we want to go for a walk in the woods? That sounds like a disaster. You know, and then for somebody else, they'd have a completely different set of associations and assumptions with parks and wildlands. So this is a tricky thing. And perceived alikeness is kind of the visitor's perspective on that on an encounter by encounter basis. So that's a thing. And just kind of lately, parks are starting to get into research on this stuff. Even 10 years ago, it was very difficult to find even a national park, which tends to be pretty well funded, that wanted to hear answers to these questions like, do my minority visitors feel safe in my park? They kind of just didn't want to know, because if they knew, then they'd have to do something about it. And that's a ton of work, and it's hard work, and, you know, maybe gets into wicked problem territory. But that doesn't make it wrong to address, you know? So that's a thing. Also, hello to the cat. Yeah,
Can't
so
keep these cats away from me.
it's all right. It's all right. Okay, so oh boy. What else? What other kinds of stuff did you guys and gals encounter on your trip?
Well, actually, one of the videos that I uploaded to the Dropbox today was talking about the wild horses in Missouri, because our chauffeur person who brought us to our launch point was telling us about how there are 4 separate herds, and there's like an actual group in Missouri that takes responsibility for the horses,
Mhm.
and how they move the males around to different herds to help stop inbreeding, and they do that, and then they also like auction off horses and stuff.
Like once the males get to be like have moved their way through all 4 of the main herds that exist in the area, they will take them and they will like put them up for adoption so that people can adopt them. And
Okay.
it's like an actual wild Mustang that
Yeah.
people are like, they had like a list of like 75 people long waiting for these horses to be put up for adoption to take them.
And I thought that was like a really cool way to manage wildlife, because most of the time we just hear of like, euthanize them, there's too many. But this way that like wasn't happening, and they were still keeping the horses in the area.
All right, so here's a pretty loaded question. I'm sure this will go fine. Do the horses at Ozark Scenic Riverways, are they a wildlife species?
They were introduced.
So technically no, but how long have they been there? Like several hundred years.
A
So
couple hundred years, yep.
So like at this point, I think that considering they have those territories and probably stave off other predators, it probably could be said for either side, I would say.
I'd say it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
It does. It does. That's a keen insight. So when the commissioning legislation of the U.S. National Park Service, the 1916 Organic Act that created it, Congress has organic acts every year. It's just they happened to create the Park Service in 1916, so it's called the 1916 Organic Act. It's got some language in there about preserving the natural character of things. And in 1916, we did not really think about or understand ecosystems like we do today. And so this natural vocab word that we just sort of like trip into in Forestry 100 and wrestle with a little bit in 220 and park planning and stuff like that. Like that's a big deal. You know, it's a lot of work, and volunteer coordination of wild horses or feral horses, wild ponies, even if it's volunteer, that's not free. That's still a tremendous amount of investment by the Park Service to sort of coordinate that, but also facilitate it and do, you know, the site management and yes mowing, not herbicide, you know, just all kinds of coordination involved. And sometimes in some places, the highly charismatic species, there's no good case to call it natural, right? Natural means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There's a guy named Bruce Hull, a researcher at Virginia Tech, who wrote a book called, I think it was Infinite Nature. And in it, he identifies 6 or 8 different actual things that people mean when they use the word natural. So we got to be careful with, it's not necessarily wrong to call them wildlife, but we need to understand all that we're hooking ourselves into when we call them wildlife or invasive or, you know, natural for the area or, you know, first class members of that particular ecosystem. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff that goes into that. And, you know, people will flip out if you do something other than what they were hoping for or expecting with respect to charismatic megafauna. So there you go. Yikes. Oh, horses.
We were a little sad that we didn't see them, but it was okay.
It's kind of cool, and they don't make any noise when they're just like hanging out in the shade during the day. Can't remember if I told you guys in this class or maybe in 220. When I was mapping the visitor created trails at Ozark Scenic Riverways, I kind of stumbled into the herd one day, or one of the herds, because I was like face down on that like bright yellow big old survey GPS with the antenna pole and back and all that, external battery in the backpack. And I'm like entering a bunch of data, and I look up after I hear this, you know, like the stallion saying, "Step off, like now, like right now." It was very exciting. So, you know, sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. And I got the heck out of there, and I wasn't able to even get back into that area and map those trails for a week or more while the herd was in that spot. So eventually they moved on. Some of those horses might even still be alive. That was 10 years ago. Wow. 10 years. My goodness. All right. What else? There's a ton of stuff that's been happening on these field trips. This is awesome, and I'm super excited that you guys got out. And thank you for uploading some videos too. We'll get into those this week.
So we experienced a couple of things at Jackson Falls.
Okay.
We came across horseback riders on the trail at one point, which there were several areas, like the climbing routes, where people had taken a bunch of horses through, and the trail was just destroyed. Not necessarily destroyed, but I mean, it was like a canyon of mud.
Oh, okay. How so? Like, just blown out trails, or what was going on?
Yeah, you had blown out trails, and then there was like other areas where they like went off the trail for a little ways and compacted new areas, but then it like looped back on the trail or would go off to nowhere.
Okay.
That's another thing. That was the other thing that I was going to mention, is that there at Jackson Falls, there are many like user trails throughout that area.
Yeah.
And it's very misleading. I mean, we got lost there Saturday, kind of lost. We ended up in a place that we didn't expect anyways and found our way back. And that's the second time that's happened there.
That's pretty wild, because there are a lot of good landmarks in Jackson Falls, and it's tiny. It's not even that big of a space. I mean, it's, you know, the diameter of the place is in hundreds of yards.
Right.
So that tells you
Yeah,
something
it's
about the
wild.
density of those visitor-created trails, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And there were several areas, like say we kind of think of like which side, like we hugged the side that you would come in on above on the cliffs, and then kind of kept hugging it as we were below it. But then
So
we
like
went,
the dog walk, or
what's that?
were you at the dog walk? Is that how you access the?
Maybe.
Dog walk is that like rock pile that you can kind of scramble down. Otherwise, you mostly have to access it from the mouth, which few people do, or just like rappel down somewhere.
Yeah, it was the dog walk then. That's where we ended up going down and back up.
Okay, right on.
But yeah, all along there's just like trails cutting off towards the creek, and same with the other side as well, which that's where we ended up making our mistake. Was we took one of those trails trying to get back to the dog walk, but it ended up leading into kind of like another little area that we weren't intending to go for.
Okay, so let's see. Bunch of tents along the edge. We've got these CCC vintage planted pine stands. Good thing those are still there. They should totally be there. I'm being sarcastic. We've got that. It's a little bit hard to see here, but the that poured concrete wood looking outhouse is there, or privy.
Yeah.
And then we've got the parking lot, camping area. Wow, I can believe it was super busy, and it will stay super busy as long as this weather is pretty not terrible. Okay, so dog walk is kind of down here somewhere. Okay, so this is a lot of stuff. Did you guys have any difficulty with, this has happened a lot at Jackson Falls, hundreds of times. Horseback riders getting pissed off at rock climbers on rock faces because they scared the hell out of the horses?
We didn't happen to notice that.
They were pretty nice to us. When
Good. Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thankfully.
Yeah, a lot of work has gone into that. Dudes like Eric Olner and Soil Climbing has sponsored some stuff, and Illinois Climbers Alliance or Association, ICA. I tried to mend some fences, build some bridges with horseback riders in this area, just because the horseback riders are officially allowed to be here. And up until 5 or 6 years ago, the Forest Service would not even like formally acknowledge that climbing was even happening. Around the time that the first couple of guidebooks came out for Jackson Falls, and at least one of them, even then, had over 500 published routes just on these walls. Like, it's that kind of a place. And the Forest Service is like, I'm sorry, what climbing? You know, because again, if they acknowledge it, then they have to do something about it. And you know, when somebody falls and needs critical medical exfiltration, the workflow is to call out for an ambulance, which comes from Pope County. And it can take up to a couple of hours even for the ambulance to arrive in the first place. Then it can take a couple more hours for some EMTs who are not at all trained or equipped for backcountry exfiltration of somebody on a backboard to wrestle a metal stretcher down the dog walk and then try to get it back out. I mean, it's a total Charlie Foxtrot, as they say in the military, a cluster problem. And then there's this basically cleared area, this nearby farm field where the helivac lands, and they got to get the person over there. Like, the whole thing is a total soup sandwich of an arrangement. So the climbers have been working really hard to, here's the thing, the climbers have been working really hard to get stair steps access down into Jackson Falls, because it's not that high of a vertical change up at the Jackson Falls end, right? It's what, 20, 30 feet, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Take a guess at how much a Forest Service acceptable stairs solution is for this spot. So there's a creek running down, and there's a waterfall kind of right in the center of the screen, and then this pool. And the vertical change here, again, 20 or 30 feet at the most in this spot, nearest access to the road. How much do you think building in stairs there would cost?
I'm gonna say 50 million.
That's a lot. That's definitely a lot. So it's between $150,000 and $250,000 for like
Way
30
too
steps. When we get into the millions is when you have spots like at Mammoth Cave, where they have a whole bunch of welded in place stainless steel rust resistant steps for visitors and stuff like that. Those can be up to $50,000 per step across
That's
the whole
what I was
project. Yeah.
Thinking of was like staircases like that.
Yeah.
For sure.
So there are all sorts of cave ecosystem considerations that go into that. But here, it's just like a regular staircase, you know. But it's got to be kind of custom fitted for stuff like this. And government contracting is pretty lucrative stuff, apparently. So maybe we shouldn't be foresters. We should be stair architects or something. I don't know. And so that's just a lot of money. And people get worse and they die sometimes from injuries sustained here because it's front country accessible. You can drive your car right up to the campsite and so forth, and it's a quick walk in, but it's a very, very slow extraction out if you can't self-rescue. So yeah, that's a tricky situation. But I'm really glad to hear that the horseback riders were kind of getting along with folks. In the past, people have been thrown off their horses when climbers, you know, benignly ignorant of the situation, would call to each other, like if you're on the face and somebody's got you on belay down at the bottom, you might say fall on or something, and if there's a horse coming by, they can't see in color as well as we can, and so they can't pick out somebody up on the rocks as well, and that's a predatory position versus a prey species. Horses are totally prey species and wired that way. And so when you hear an unfamiliar sound coming from above and behind, that is like, this must be a mountain lion jumping on my back territory. Let me jettison my cargo and GTFO, as the Zoomers say. So that's happened a lot at Jackson Falls. This is one of those spots where two different kinds of recreation just really come into conflict with each other. Again, it's asymmetric, right? Rock climbers are just calling to each other. The horseback riders are like, please don't let me Christopher Reeve this, like, keep me safe. So
We encountered at least 3 or 4 people that were lost on the trail trying to get back to the dog walk.
Okay.
So I think what it seems like is, so we came in at the very entrance there where we were showing where the waterfall is, like that 20 or 30 foot cliff, and then follow the east side. But then, like, once you get back to the waterfall area, if you make a loop, you gotta like kind of cut off real quick back to the east. It looks like there.
Yeah. So
you get into that other.
Yeah.
Okay.
So east is over here to the right side of the screen. And the road kind of goes up along that, and there's a bunch of trails that kind of cut up to the road, and there are parallel trails that follow the lip of the cliff along. It's pretty wild. So one issue that the rock climbers really wrestled with was there are some glacial remnant plant communities that are fairly common, like bog standard common bog, no pun intended, in central Canada. But they were left behind, and they're trapped here on these little sheltered spots, on the cliff faces and the bluff lines in southern Illinois when the glaciers retreated. And so those are protected under law as rare, threatened, or endangered species or communities, even though they're, totally common elsewhere. And so rock climbers cleaning routes, putting in sport bolts with rock drills and epoxy, and servicing old hardware, pulling it out, stuff like that. The botanist on the Shawnee was for a long time kind of really afraid to ask any questions about, like, where are people rock climbing up here, because it's a federal crime to clean up some of these things if they're pulling out some of these plants. And so it became like this super awkward don't ask, don't tell thing. And then with injuries, it kind of came to a head. Like they couldn't ignore it anymore. And so they had to start working with the climber community to understand that, a forest protection officer understands specific named features at Jackson Falls to be in certain spots. And the rock climbers have this whole other map, like whole other jargon, whole other set of names for this place, which is hundreds of entries long and very, very specific, down to like per meter GPS coordinates for the base of these climbs. But like a climber would say, I'm up at such and such wall and somebody needs help, and the dispatcher at 911 or dispatch office that the Shawnee uses or whatever, they were like, I'm sorry, that's not even on the map anywhere. Where are you? And they'd be like, I'm at Jackson Falls. Okay, where at Jackson Falls? I'm at this wall. And like, that's not on the map. And so there's this huge problem. So they finally got together, and some of these climbing guidebook authors were like gifting boxes of copies of the book to all the different rangers and foresters, to being like, please, when we need help, we really need help in these specific spots. Now you know exactly where they are, and so forth. So it can get better, but it's kind of a tricky dance to make sure that none of those climbs are on any of those biological communities. So you get the forest botanist involved, you get the forest protection officers involved. It's just like everybody's this massive dance to coordinate to make sure that people can be okay. Did you guys see any toilet paper flowers while you were there?
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful white flowers revealed by the snow. Okay. So that's bad. How long do the E. coli gut organisms and encysting protozoans like Giardia, how long can they stay active in shallow sediments in like Jackson Creek after somebody poops them out?
I have no idea.
That's a big 10, double digits, 10 years. So if somebody punts a crunk and a rainstorm kind of stirs up the sediment, you see this huge spike in the danger level in the water. And people aren't thinking that because it's entirely invisible, you know? You can't tell how much, you know, fecal coliform is in the water based on what algae is growing there, for example. So people get their horses there, horse takes a drink, horse takes a poop, climber leaves a poop. Maybe not everybody buries it. I'm not saying all climbers are gross. I'm saying very occasionally, you know, maybe somebody has uncontrollable explosive diarrhea as a function of giardiasis, giardia contamination. So that closed down bathroom is a forest health and people health issue too. Yikes. If only we had something like Leave No Trace that could teach people to, you know, responsibly handle a spot.
Yeah.
If only Leave No Trace had not just climbing specific distillation of its ethic, but like climbing in temperate forests. They've produced dozens and dozens and dozens of different versions of their thing, just kind of contextualized, because not everybody is blessed to be taking the classes that you guys are and have this amazing, you know, post high school background in forestry and training and stuff like that. If only, man, if only, gosh. And then the next trick is getting everybody to actually remember that stuff. But another conversation for another day. Anything else to Jackson Falls? It's also 5 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We can go all night if you want to with this. This is awesome. But if you need to dip, as they say, then please do. Anything else for Jackson Falls?
I think that was the main things.
Okay, cool. Very cool. All right. Let's see. So we heard from Keone a little bit and our Ozark folks and Pierre's. Leah, tell us about your bike packing trip.
Yeah, it was a really, really cool trip. We actually ended up camping at a horse campground, so that kind of talking about horses there too. And that was over at Cedar Lake campground, which is actually in Gilead, not like the big Cedar Lake, the little tiny Cedar Lake over near Gilead. And there's a huge campground there. So it was just getting really late and we'd gone like 60 miles. So we were kind of planning on stealth camping and we ended up camping there instead. And they were doing like barrel races. So there was a ton of horses there. It was nuts. It was crazy. Definitely no social distancing whatsoever going on for sure. But we did. We stayed over in our separate little spot and had a nice little time away from everyone because I'm actually allergic to horses also.
Me too.
But it was fine. Yeah, other than that, the first night we camped at Trail of Tears State Park, and there was very few people there, actually. That was Friday night, and we had it pretty much all to ourselves. We had one of those nice spots with the fireplace in the shelter and everything. And yeah, that's it. But yeah, the horse, I call them horse people. I'm sure there's a better term. They were really friendly. Like it was fine, but yeah, there's definitely more horses in that area in the eastern side of the state than I realized. Like there were so many. But
horses are big business in Southern Illinois, for sure. I had no idea until I got involved with some horse research projects. Wow, they are numerous and organized, and some of them are pretty well funded and so forth. It's a big deal.
And actually, Molly kind of pointed this out to me, is she thought like, because they've done, Molly's worked with a lot of like mountain biking and horse people like trying to come together to work on trails, and equestrian people, I guess, I don't know. Anyways, she thought that she'd seen like that they were mainly older, like an older demographic, but in this campground at least, maybe because the barrel racing I think was for youth, there was actually like everyone of all ages, like a lot of kids and teenagers and whole families there. So it was interesting because we had kind of thought of it as being more of one demographic, but there we were seeing it across the board of people.
Okay.
Using
So
horses.
to these horseback riders, did you have a sense of not all horses are the same for all uses, in the same way that not all bicycles are the same for all uses? Like, was there a particular kind of horse that you guys saw from like a distance that you didn't get allergic?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not very good at discerning. I mean, there was different kinds of horses like ponies and like stuff like that, but I don't really know much about
Okay. How many draft horses did you see? Like big old Clydesdales and Belgians?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of those.
There were. Okay.
I think. I'm not great with them. Like they all look giant to me. So
okay. Right
I feel like there were some big ones, but I don't know. I'm really not good at figuring that out. I do know there was one place we were going by, just like in a field, where we saw some different horses, and they were like separated by an electric fence or whatever, and they were having a little, I don't know, a little altercation between the two horse like groups or whatever, of just the horses. And then there was one in the middle that like was out of the fence that was like this giant like paint, I don't know, I think it was a paint horse, but it was like really tall and thin and like just like a very fancy looking horse, but it was cool. But yeah, there was some kind of horse politics going on just between the horses there that was kind of interesting to watch.
All right. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Very cool. And y'all's gear for the trip worked out okay? Like everybody was kitted out with the right kind of bike and suitably large but not too large tent?
Yeah, it was pretty cool because Molly and Ryan are both very experienced, and I basically just used all the same gear that I used backpacking and put it onto my bike with like a seat pack, like a pack that goes off the back, and then a triangle frame bag and a front roll. And yeah, we all had kind of small, like Nemo, like little small tents like that. And that worked out great. We had gravel bikes or all road bikes, which was perfect for the route that we picked because we were on gravel roads. We did some steep hill climbs, and then on the trail on those old Forest Service roads, it was super muddy and very technical, and we got covered in mud, but it was super fun. And then a lot of paved roads too. So they were good bikes for it. The train was really fun because even yesterday when we came into Golconda, I think we were on maybe 145 or 146, but there wasn't much traffic at all on the road, and it was very smooth and had a lot of like, I think we were descending down into Lusk Creek, like, so we started pretty high up near Eddyville, and then we're doing a lot of like pretty steep like downhill descents that were very, very fun because they were straight and on like smooth roads, so you could just not worry about braking at all and just go full speed. It was fun.
Right on.
Yeah.
So I'm asking those questions about the horses and the bikes to kind of get at this idea of specialization to help us understand that kind of within each activity, each forest rec activity, it's not all the same. Like it's a very dendritic or tree style branching specialization phenomenon that we see for basically, it doesn't matter what activity you're doing, but some people are filthy casuals and they're using a beach cruiser, like literally a beach cruiser to ride in the salt water, metal bikes in salt water at the beach at Cumberland Island National Seashore so that they can go see feral horses. And you guys weren't even using like bikes, you were using specifically all road bikes, which are not the same thing as road bikes. They're even more specialized in their application. So this is something to be aware of. And the same thing applies, of course, for rock climbing. Like there's trad climbing versus sport climbing versus gym climbing versus bouldering, and this whole sort of weird, not weird, but kind of pecking order a little bit on what kind of climbs that you are working on in terms of the Yosemite rating system and stuff like that. Like 514C plus, but slightly high because they are rated a little bit aggressively in this particular area for dynamic moves. Like there's all of this intricacy. And so as a forester, when you start working on a particular forest and, you know, you have mountain bikers and rock climbers and horseback riders and folks who want to go fish and all of the other different activities, don't ever want to fall into the mistake of just saying, all of you nonconformists look the same. Like everybody's got their particular little corner of, not little, but their particular specialized corner of their activity, plus all of the kind of experience and depth and history they may or may not have at the particular place that they're in. So activity plus place and just all this stuff. There are a million combinations of all of these, even in a single small local or municipal park. It's a lot, and that's okay. But mainly we want to have kind of a posture of openness and humility and warmth and curiosity to learn where folks are coming from with their perspectives on their experience use history, their specialization, how those overlap with this particular spot in your park or forest that they want to use for their activity and so forth, so that you don't kind of get into the nasty, nasty trap of one size fits all solutions, because that's going to be a disaster. You know, if you want to work at Grand Teton as a climbing ranger or doing high angle rescue, or at Yosemite, the Park Service has a couple of climbing rescue teams. They're some of the most elite climbers in the world. And even in that case, they have to specialize their loadouts and their training and their seasons and all of that for the specific parks that they're in. They have to be extremely elite at those places in order to get some pretty elite climbers out of life-threatening situations. Same thing with the park rangers who run the national trail systems. There are multiple, right? So Trail of Tears is a national historic trail. The Appalachian Trail is a national scenic trail. There are national recreation trails and so forth. And lots of different people using those for different kinds of things. So a day hiker is going to have very different needs and wants and expectations and propensity for conflict and stuff like that versus somebody who's through hiking, you know, completely different perspective on stuff, exact same facility, even same time of day, same location. So yeah, it's good to know, for example, that there's a culture among through hikers of yogiing, which is purposefully and politely separating day hikers from food that they've kindly hiked in for you without knowing it, and not getting into the point of like making things like actually weird and like begging or panhandling, but just being like, oh man, that sandwich looks really good. Oh, looks like you have so many of them. It's wonderful when people give you food and you're very hungry. But if you're a park ranger and you're not aware of that particular dynamic among through hikers, which is a very small portion of the multiple millions of people who use the Appalachian Trail in a given year, rolling up onto that situation where a through hiker is talking with like a nicely dressed family that doesn't smell disgusting, it could be a pretty different outcome if you're a law enforcement ranger and stuff like that, and any assumptions you bring into that. So yeah, all this to say that specialization is a thing across all activities, and each of y'all should take a moment to, at some point, just kind of reflect, what are my activities and how deep down the rabbit hole am I on this? Like, am I a totally newbie climber and I need lots of help? I don't even have my own harness. Or am I teaching other people and organizing trips? And am I way at the at the far end of this. So maybe we've got a lifetime of experience and many thousands of dollars worth just in gear, and so forth. And you can specialize in multiple things. That's pretty cool. Another term I used was experience use history, which is more about sort of retrospective. Like some people go to very few parks and they go across a very limited number of trips, kind of like pretty casual. There's some folks who go to lots of parks, but very few times to each park. We might call those collectors. There are folks who go to very few different parks, but they go many, many times. We might call that like a local or a veteran. And then we might have the Peter Pans that just go to a lot of places a lot of times. Peter Pan is kind of a derogatory term, but it's the folks who just never really want to grow up and they just like keep going gonzo all over on trips. So experience use history is another way to understand your users on a forest or your visitors and so forth. Okay. Other stuff from any of these trips. This is all awesome. I'm super excited for you, and I'm a little jelly. That's jealous, not thick. There's collisions on jargon here, okay?
I had just one quick wildlife interaction I wanted to share because it was interesting.
Shoot, no pun intended.
So I was like about to strap up my seat pack, and it like Velcros on there, and I was like reaching over to grab the Velcro, and I saw a silhouette of a spider, and I like immediately sensed that it was like a scary spider. Like I thought Black Widow right away, because I'm from the West and there's a ton of Black Widows out there. And sure enough, there was a Black Widow spider that overnight had gone into that Velcro spot on my bike, and I was reach in there and grab right there, but I saw her just in time. So just check your gear out in the morning, guys. But yeah, it was an intense moment for me for sure. Like, whoa. Molly's like, what?
It was very intense, and it was also right after you were out of your tent, you know? Yeah. No, but I'm all joking aside, I'm very glad that that did not end your trip in a bad way. That's yikes. Yeah, those are danger friends. Okay, for our wildlife management students, has Clay talked with you at all about rocket netting, which has nothing to do with Black Widows, but I need everybody to understand that rocket netting exists. Okay, that's all I got right there. All right. Do you guys and gals have any questions or observations about today's content? I know folks are just getting back from trips and, setting up tents and cleaning stuff out and stocking away gear. Maybe you're keeping it out because you're going to go right back out. That's great. Anything from today before we wrap it up?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Right on. Dr. Akmani's posted a bunch of stuff, and I am trying to find some folks who can overlap their work schedules with our Zoom meetings so we can just like talk to some folks. Otherwise, if I can't make it happen like right now, I'll just sort of record stuff as we do it all summer long and be sure to send that out to you guys even after the class is over. No big deal. So yeah, you guys are working hard. I want to make sure to honor that. So if you don't have any other questions for me, I'm good to go. We'll peruse these videos and photos you guys have uploaded and are about to upload, stuff like that. So please do. And otherwise, see you tomorrow or stick around for more questions. Up to you. Nice work getting out there, gang. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Good night.
Hey, Dr. Park, I actually did have a question. I am actually not quite an executive board member on the climbing club. I was almost a board member, and I'm going to be a part of one of the like lower boards for like women climbers.
Oh,
but
cool.
I was hoping to talk to you more in the future about like better like stuff to do about that kind of thing, because a bunch of my friends are all like the actual board, and they all care very, very deeply about like how integral stuff is, but sometimes they get stuck in their own heads when it comes to just climbing. Like,
Sure.
they talk
That's
a lot
totally
about
normal.
like,
Yeah.
they talk a lot about bolting up like Garden of the Gods and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is the best idea. So I would love to talk to you more about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. So you're talking about SIU Climbing Club or ICA?
No, I'm SIU Climbing Club.
Okay. Right on. Yeah. Yeah. No, my research group goes way back with climbers. Kind of right as I arrived here. I had no idea that Southern Illinois has some world-class climbing. I was like, oh, we have some rolling hills. That's nice, you know.
Me neither. Not until I got here and started doing it. And I was like really big into climbing a couple years ago, and then I got my dog, and then it just became a lot more difficult. But I've spent a lot more time going out recently, or in the last couple of months, and
Okay.
we've been going out a lot, and especially the people who are now taking over from the last board who weren't doing super hot with certain things. So it's gonna like get revamped, hopefully. And like, it's just I hope that in some way, like somehow we can like get everybody to like be happy and work together, and like everybody can recreate together, because that's an important part of being able to recreate outside and understanding recreation.
For sure. I'd be happy to work with you. And I know that the climbing club for a number of years in a row was going out to like the Moab area every year for spring break. And there's
I know
a ton
they did
of...
up until this last year, I think.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I could see this year being kind of weird with that, but yeah, there's a ton of resources compiled for climbing out west in Red Rocks country too. And not just like pure rock climbing, other super adjacent stuff like canyoneering, which is rock climbing plus bouldering plus, it's just boogieing all over the place. It's fantastic. So yeah, if I can help with, any of that stuff, I'm just kind of making sure everybody's aware of some real good options with that.
Okay.
Yeah, let me know how I can help.
All right, cool beans. Thanks, Dr.
Cool.
Park.
All right, let's chat some more throughout the summer.
All right, sounds good. See you later.
Yeah,
Bye.
see you around.